welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, thanks to you, we're diving into the world of bioradar, all because of some really interesting Arabic sources you sent our way. Research papers, parts of a book. It's a pretty wild mix.
Yeah, it's exciting, Bioradar, it's this blend of science and stuff that makes you wonder.
For sure. I mean, we're going from birds flying thousands of miles to dowsing to energy fields, and then even like parapsychology. Talk about a wild ride. One of the first things that jumped out at me when I looked at these sources was how some animals, especially birds, seem to be using bioradar to navigate. Like the black-polled warbler, the golden plover, and the Arctic tern. Those guys are like the ultimate long-distance travelers.
Seriously. Yeah. When we say ultimate, we mean it. The Arctic tern, that bird makes the longest migration of any animal on the planet. It goes from the Arctic all the way down to the Antarctic and then back again every single year. It's almost 44,000 miles. Think about that. It's like having a frequent flyer card for the entire world. Can you imagine making that trip without a GPS?
I get lost going from the produce aisle to the dairy section at the grocery store. So how do these birds do it? These sources mention two things: magnetic navigation and something called bioelectric field detection.
It's like this. Many researchers think these birds have an internal compass. They can sense the Earth's magnetic field, which helps them, stay on track during these super long flights. And it's not just birds either. Sea turtles use magnetic navigation too. That's how they go back to the same beaches where they hatched, even after swimming across entire oceans.
It's like they have a sixth sense that we don't even have.
Oh.
Speaking of things we might not understand, the sources also talk about dowsing, where people use a forked stick or rods to find water or minerals. It sounds almost magical.
Dowsing has been around for a long time. We even found mentions of Georges Agricola, this scientist from the 1500s, and Jean-Nicolas de Grenoble, a priest from the 1600s. Both of them actually studied dowsing. The idea is that dowsers are picking up on really small changes in the electromagnetic fields, or maybe even something called alloptic radiation that's coming from water sources.
Alloptic radiation. That's a new one for me. But hold on, are we really suggesting a stick can show you where the water is? Isn't there a more, scientific explanation? Like maybe the dowser is moving the rods without realizing it? There's that thing called the ideomotor effect, right? Where tiny muscle movements can make it seem like some outside force is moving things.
It's good to be skeptical. The scientific community is still figuring out if dowsing is a real thing or not. Some studies kind of hint that there might be something to it, while others say it's just that ideomotor effect you mentioned.
So the jury is still out on that one. But speaking of forces we can't see, these sources also talk about human energy fields. They mention bioplasma and biological energy fields as possible explanations for a lot of different things. Yeah. It's kind of like the idea of qi in Chinese medicine, that vital life force energy.
Yeah, it's a really cool connection. And you've got practices like acupuncture, which is all about those energy pathways, the meridians. But is there any real scientific evidence for these energy fields?
That is the million-dollar question.
Well, there have been some attempts to actually measure this human energy field. Researchers like Thomas Galen Hieronymus, this American physician, claimed he captured images of it using something called Kirlian photography. And there was this Japanese researcher, Hiroshi Motoyama. He did a ton of studies on measuring and describing this energy field, even connecting it to different states of consciousness.
Okay, so we're talking about an energy field that might be influenced by our thoughts and emotions, like a bioelectromagnetic aura that surrounds us. This is where it feels like we're moving a little further away from like traditional science and into the world of parapsychology. And these sources even bring up things like psychokinesis and telekinesis.
It's true. These topics definitely face a lot of skepticism, but there have been people like Nina Kulagina and Alla Vinogradova who were actually studied for their supposed ability to move objects with their minds. Of course, you always have to consider the placebo effect, but it's hard to just, dismiss what researchers saw firsthand.
This brings up a big question for me. If psychic abilities are real, how do they work? Is there some kind of psychic energy that can actually act on the physical world? The sources start to get pretty theoretical at this point.
Yeah, they delve into some pretty mind-bending theories that try to explain these impossible-sounding things. We're talking about quantum physics, holographic theories, stuff that suggests there might be a deeper level of reality that's affecting the physical world that we experience.
Hold on, are you saying that our reality is just the tip of the iceberg? Like, there's a whole other dimension hiding just beneath the surface?
Kind of, yeah. That's what some of these theories propose. One example is the work of David Bohm, this physicist who came up with the concept of implicate and explicate order. The implicate order, it's like a blueprint, a deeper level of reality that unfolds into the explicate order, which is the world we actually see and experience.
Okay, I think I'm following you.
Right.
But how does this connect to the brain and bioradar?
That's where Carl Pribram's holographic brain theory comes in. Pribram was a neuroscientist who suggested that the brain doesn't just process information like a computer. It's more like a hologram, interpreting frequencies from that deeper level of reality that Bohm was talking about.
So instead of a physical brain dealing with physical information, it's more like a receiver tuned into some, like, cosmic signal. This is making my head spin a little bit. I kind of like it.
Yeah.
But how does all this actually relate to bioradar?
Well, if our brains can interpret these subtle frequencies, maybe that's how bioradar works too. It's like we're all walking around like antennas picking up signals from everything around us, maybe even each other, but only some of us are aware of it.
That's a really profound thought. It makes you wonder about the potential of bioradar, not just for understanding nature, but also for, developing new technologies. But these sources also highlight how controversial this whole field of research is. It's like we're venturing into uncharted territory here.
Exactly. One of the biggest challenges is being able to replicate results. Lots of studies on bioradar and psychic phenomena have some really interesting findings, but doing it over and over again consistently, that's been a problem. That's why it's so hard for the scientific community to really embrace these ideas.
So it's not as simple as saying, hey, look, we found proof. There's still a lot of questions and some things that don't quite add up.
You got it. And then there's the issue of explaining how bioradar actually works. We've talked about some cool theories, but we don't have a full scientifically accepted explanation yet.
So where does all the research stand today? Who's out there pushing the boundaries of this field? The sources mention a couple of organizations that have been involved in bioradar research.
Well, there's the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, that are known as PR. They did all these experiments on human consciousness and how it might be interacting with physical systems. They used things like random number generators to see if human intention could actually affect the outcome of seemingly random events.
Here, I've heard of them. Their research is super fascinating and controversial. It's like they're working in that gray area between established science and things we can't explain. What about the research done in Russia? The sources mention that too.
The sources highlight the A.S. Popov All-Union Scientific and Technical Society of Radiotechnology and Electrical Communications. They were all about bioenergy and biocommunication. They were exploring concepts like biofield and bioplasma, the idea that living things give off and interact with these subtle energy fields.
So it sounds like while some researchers in the West were looking into things like psychokinesis and telekinesis, researchers in Russia were focused on bioenergy and biocommunication. It's almost like two sides of the same coin, both hinting at the possibility that there's more to reality than we can see.
Exactly, and both suggesting that we might be able to harness these subtle energies for practical purposes. Imagine if we could tap into these biofields for healing, for communication, or even just to understand consciousness itself. It's a pretty exciting idea.
Speaking of practical stuff, the sources talk about some specific technologies used in bioradar research. One that jumped out at me was the electroscope.
Right. An electroscope, it's a device that detects electric charge, and researchers have used it to try and measure those subtle energy fields around living things. The idea is that these energy fields might actually interact with the electroscope and cause changes in its readings.
It's like a super sensitive version of those static electricity detectors they have at science museums. The sources also mentioned something called the mind wave. What's that all about?
Mind wave seems to be this technology that measures and interprets brainwave activity. Researchers have used it to look at the connection between brainwaves and different states of consciousness, like meditation or focused intention.
So could the mind wave be used to pick up and understand bioradar signals? Is that what the sources are suggesting?
That's definitely a possibility. If bioradar is all about sending or receiving these subtle electromagnetic signals, then a device that can measure brainwave activity might be able to pick up on those signals too. It's a really exciting area for future research.
It sounds like we might be on the verge of some huge discoveries here. But like with anything new, there are always going to be skeptics and people who aren't convinced.
Of course. It's always a good idea to be a little skeptical. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, right?
So what are some of the criticisms and challenges that researchers in this field are facing? What are the main arguments against bioradar?
One common criticism is that the effects observed in bioradar experiments are often really small and hard to separate from all the background noise. This makes it really tricky to rule out other explanations, like random fluctuations or subtle influences from the environment.
I can see how that would be a problem. If the signal is weak, how can you be sure you're not just seeing what you want to see? What other challenges do researchers face?
Another big challenge is how subjective a lot of these bioradar phenomena are. For example, with dowsing, the dowser's own beliefs and expectations might unconsciously influence their movements, leading to those self-fulfilling prophecies.
That's the ideomotor effect again, right? Our minds can play tricks on us.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of potential bias in the research itself. Scientists who are already convinced that bioradar exists might be more likely to interpret their findings in a way that supports their beliefs, even if the evidence isn't totally clear.
That's why it's so crucial to have really strong experimental designs and independent verification of any results. It seems like the field of bioradar is still in its early stages, with a lot of potential, but also a lot of obstacles to overcome.
I agree, it's still early days. But even with all the challenges, there's a growing body of research that suggests there might be something real to bioradar.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The sources go into some specific examples of animal navigation that seem to go against everything we know. We've already talked about birds and sea turtles, but there are some even more incredible cases.
One of the most fascinating is the albatross. These birds can spend years at sea, literally flying around the globe, and yet they somehow manage to return to their breeding grounds with, pinpoint accuracy? How is that even possible?
You've got me hooked. What did the sources say?
Well, they suggest that albatrosses might be using a combination of magnetic navigation and bioelectric field detection. They propose that these birds can sense these tiny, tiny fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field and use that to make a mental map of their surrounding.
A mental map of the entire ocean. That's mind-blowing. But how would they even pick up on those tiny magnetic fluctuations?
There's evidence that some animals, including birds, have these specialized cells that contain magnetite, a naturally magnetic mineral. And these magnetite-containing cells, they could act like miniature compasses, allowing the birds to figure out where they are in relation to the Earth's magnetic field.
It's like they have a built-in GPS.
Yeah.
But the sources also mention bioelectric field detection. What does that involve?
The idea is that some animals can actually detect those weak electric fields that are given off by other living things. This would be super helpful for navigating in murky water or for finding prey that might be hidden from sight.
So we're talking about a form of electroreception, like what sharks and some fish use, but applied to navigation. That's incredible.
It really is. And there's evidence to suggest that sea turtles might use bioelectric field detection to help them navigate during those epic migrations.
It's like they're tuning into the electrical symphony of the ocean. The sources mention a specific sea turtle that was tracked traveling from Florida all the way to the Azores Islands. That's over 3,000 miles.
And the amazing thing is this turtle followed a very specific route, staying within this narrow corridor of warm water currents. It's like it was following an invisible roadmap, guided by something more than just its sense of direction.
This makes me wonder if other animals might be using bioradar for navigation too. What about insects?
The sources mention the monarch butterfly, which makes this incredible migration from Canada and the United States all the way down to Mexico every year.
I've heard about that. Millions of monarch butterflies, all gathered in this small area of forest. It must be an incredible sight to see.
It is. And the sources suggest that monarch butterflies might be using a combination of magnetic navigation and celestial cues to find their way.
Celestial cues? You mean like navigating by the stars?
Exactly. Monarch butterflies are known to use the sun as a compass, and they might even be using the stars to figure out where they are.
It's like they have a built-in sextant. But the sources also hint that they might be sensitive to subtle changes in air pressure and temperature, which could also help them navigate.
That's right. It's likely that they're using a bunch of different cues to navigate, creating this multi-layered guidance system. It's a truly remarkable thing.
So we've seen that birds, sea turtles, and even insects might be using bioradar for navigation. But what about mammals? Are there any examples of them using this ability?
The sources talk about several types of bats that use echolocation to navigate and hunt.
Echolocation's amazing. They send out these sound waves and then interpret the echoes to build a 3D picture of their surroundings. It's like built-in sonar. But how does echolocation relate to bioradar?
Well, echolocation is considered a form of biosonar, which is a subset of bioradar. They both involve sending and receiving signals to learn about the environment.
So echolocation is like a specialized version of bioradar that uses sound waves instead of electromagnetic waves. That makes sense.
Exactly. And the sources highlight just how precise bat echolocation is. Some bats can even tell the difference between different types of insects based on the subtle differences in the echoes they get back.
Wow. It's like they have a taste for sound. The sources mention a couple of specific types of bats.
They talk about the microbat, which is known for using these really high-frequency echolocation calls. These bats can make sounds that are too high for humans to hear, which lets them detect really, really small objects.
It's like they're operating on a completely different frequency. What about the other type of bat?
The sources also talk about the brown bat, which uses lower frequency echolocation calls. They're often found in forests and can fly through really dense vegetation with amazing agility.
So different bats have evolved different echolocation strategies that fit their environments and how they hunt. It's amazing how adaptable nature is.
It really is. And it highlights the incredible diversity of bioradar adaptations in the animal kingdom.
The sources also mentioned a couple of other interesting examples of animals that might be using bioradar. One that caught my eye was the mole.
Moles are such fascinating creatures. They spend most of their lives underground, navigating through these complex tunnel systems, all in complete darkness.
I've always wondered how they manage to get around. It's not like they can use their eyes. What do the sources say?
The sources suggest that moles might be using a combination of touch and bioelectric field detection to navigate. They have these super sensitive whiskers and snouts that can detect vibrations and changes in the soil.
So it's like they're feeling their way through the darkness. But what about this bioelectric field detection?
There's some evidence that moles might be able to detect those weak electric fields given off by earthworms and other invertebrates in the soil. This could help them find food and avoid running into obstacles.
It's like they have an electrical sense of smell. That's incredible. The sources also mention another mammal that might be using bioradar, the killer whale, or orca.
Orcas are known for their really complex social interactions and their incredible ability to hunt in coordinated groups.
Orcas are so intelligent. I've seen documentaries about how they hunt, and it's truly amazing. How might they be using bioradar?
The sources propose that orcas might use a combination of echolocation and biomagnetic field detection to navigate, communicate, and hunt.
Echolocation makes sense for hunting, especially when the water is murky. But biomagnetic field detection, how would that work?
Some researchers believe that orcas might be able to sense the magnetic fields that are generated by ocean currents and underwater geological formations. This could help them get their bearings in the vastness of the ocean and navigate across those really long distances.
It's like they have an internal map of the ocean floor. That's amazing. But the sources also suggest that they might use biomagnetic field detection to communicate with each other.
That's right. Some scientists think that orcas might actually generate their own magnetic fields, maybe through special cells in their bodies, and use those fields to send signals to other orcas in their pod.
It's like they're speaking in magnetic whispers. That's a really cool idea.
It is. And it highlights how bioradar might not just be for navigation. It could be for communication, too. Now, let's get back to dowsing for a minute. The sources mention some interesting historical figures and events that shed some light on this ancient practice.
Okay, let's go back to the world of dowsing. What kind of historical nuggets did you find in the sources?
One of the most interesting figures is Jacques-Aimar Vernet, a French peasant from the 1600s.
What made Jacques-Aimar Vernet so special? Was he just really good at dowsing?
According to the sources, Aimar Vernet was famous for his dowsing skills. People said he could find underground water sources with incredible accuracy. He was even asked by the authorities to help them solve crimes.
Solve crimes? Wait, how did dowsing come into play there? This is getting interesting.
The sources describe a case where Aimar Vernet was called in to track down criminals who were on the run. By using his dowsing rods, he supposedly followed the trail of these fugitives and eventually led the authorities straight to their hideout.
It sounds like something out of a detective novel.
Blech.
But was there any real evidence to support these claims?
The sources don't give any hard evidence, but they do mention that lots of people saw Aimar Vernet's dowsing abilities firsthand, including government officials.
So while there might not be any scientific proof, his reputation seems like it was built on more than just rumors.
Right. His story highlights the lasting fascination with dowsing and how it might be tapping into something beyond what we currently understand.
It definitely makes you think. The sources also mention another historical figure who was involved in dowsing.
They talk about Hans Schroeder, a German scientist from the 1700s who did all these experiments with different types of dowsing rods and techniques.
So Schroeder was looking at dowsing from a more scientific perspective.
It seems like it. He wanted to figure out how dowsing worked and develop more reliable methods for doing it.
Did he come up with any theories about how it might actually work?
The sources don't go into too much detail about his theories, but they do say he believed dowsing was a real phenomenon that could be studied and improved.
It's amazing how dowsing has attracted both mystics and scientists throughout history. It's like it straddles the line between the mystical and the scientific.
Definitely. It raises these big questions about the nature of perception, intuition, and how we connect to the natural world.
Talking about different approaches to dowsing, the sources mention some specific techniques and tools people have used. One that caught my attention was map dowsing.
Oh yeah, map dowsing is when dowsers try to find water or other things using a map instead of physically going to the location.
Wait a minute, you're saying you can douse from a distance just by using a map?
That's what they claim. Dowsers who use map dowsing believe they can connect to a target location through the map and then use their rods or pendulums to sense if there's water or other substances there.
It's almost like psychic remote viewing. Is there any actual evidence to back this up?
The sources don't provide any scientific evidence, but they do mention cases where map dowsing was apparently used to successfully find water.
So even though it might sound kind of crazy, there are people who believe it and claim to have seen it work. The sources actually mention a specific case with a dowser named Henry Gross.
Henry Gross was an American dowser who became pretty well known in the mid-20th century for his map dowsing abilities. He claimed he could find oil and mineral deposits from a distance just by using maps and pendulums.
So instead of looking for water, he was using dowsing for geological exploration.
Yeah, and according to the sources, he was really successful at it. They mention a case where he was hired by a mining company and managed to find a new ore deposit using map dowsing.
Wow. If that's true, it definitely suggests there might be something more to map dowsing than just random chance. But the sources also mention another interesting aspect of dowsing.
Right. They talk about how people use dowsing rods to detect those subtle energy fields that surround living things.
So it's like dowsing is being used as a tool for bioenergy research.
Exactly. Some dowsers believe they can use their rods to sense the aura or energy field around living things. They say that the rods move differently depending on the person's health, emotional state, or even their spiritual energy.
It's like a different form of biofeedback. But is there any scientific basis for this?
The sources don't mention any specific studies, but they do say that some researchers have explored the possibility that dowsing rods might be sensitive to really subtle electromagnetic fields or other bioenergetic things.
That's definitely an area that needs more research. It seems like dowsing is this multifaceted practice that could be used in all sorts of areas, finding water, geological exploration, even bioenergy research.
It's true, and people all over the world are still fascinated by it. It gives us a glimpse into the mysteries of the unseen and the unexplained.
But let's bring our focus back to the concept of human energy fields. The sources have some really interesting insights into the research that's been done in this area.
One of the most influential researchers was Dr. Wilhelm Reich. He was an Austrian psychoanalyst who developed this theory of orgone energy.
Orgone energy? I've never heard of that. What's that all about?
Reich believed that orgone energy is this universal life force that exists in all living things. He thought that this energy could get blocked or suppressed, and that could lead to physical and emotional problems.
So it's similar to the idea of qi in Chinese medicine, that vital energy that needs to flow freely for us to be healthy.
That's a good comparison. Reich believed that orgone energy could be gathered and manipulated using special devices called orgone accumulators.
Orgone accumulators? What did those look like? What were they supposed to do?
The sources describe them as enclosed spaces that were lined with these alternating layers of organic and inorganic materials, like wood and metal. Reich claimed that these accumulators could draw in and concentrate orgone energy, which could then be used for therapeutic purposes.
So it's like a battery for life force energy. Did his ideas catch on in the scientific community?
Well, unfortunately, Reich's theories and claims were met with a lot of skepticism and criticism from the mainstream scientific community. A lot of people questioned his research methods, and they didn't think his ideas had enough scientific support.
It seems like a lot of researchers who are pioneers in these kinds of fields face a lot of resistance from the establishment.
That's true. When you're dealing with ideas that challenge conventional thinking, it can be tough to break through those barriers.
But even if Reich's theories about orgone energy weren't widely accepted, It seems like his work inspired others to explore the idea of human energy fields.
Definitely. The sources mention other researchers who looked into human energy fields, using different approaches and techniques.
One name that caught my attention was Dr. Valerie Hunt.
Dr. Hunt was a professor of kinesiology at UCLA and a real pioneer in the study of human energy fields. She used a bunch of different instruments, including electromyography, EMG, and electroencephalography, EEG, to measure the electrical activity associated with these fields.
So she was using conventional medical equipment to study something unconventional. That's a cool approach. What did she find?
Her research showed that the human energy field is this dynamic, complex structure that reflects the person's physical, emotional, and mental state. She observed that changes in the field were connected to changes in the person's health, stress levels, and even their spiritual practices.
It's like the energy field is a mirror reflecting what's happening inside us.
Exactly. Dr. Hunt's work provided some of the first scientific evidence that people have an energy field that goes beyond the physical body.
Her research seems to have opened the door for a deeper understanding of human energy fields. The sources mention another researcher who went down this path.
They talk about Barbara Brennan, a former NASA physicist who became an energy healer. She developed a whole system of energy healing based on her understanding of the human energy field.
So she was bringing science and spirituality together.
Exactly. She combined her scientific background with her intuition to come up with this model of the human energy field that has 7 layers, each connected to different parts of a person's being.
7 layers. That's fascinating. What do these layers represent?
According to Brennan, the layers go from the physical body to the emotional body, the mental body, and even the spiritual body. She believed that if these layers were out of balance, it could lead to physical and emotional problems. She also believed that energy healing techniques could restore that balance and help people heal.
It sounds like a holistic approach to health and well-being, recognizing how interconnected our physical, emotional, and spiritual parts are.
Exactly. Brennan's work, along with Dr. Hunt's and other researchers, has helped us understand the human energy field better and how it might impact our health and consciousness.
But let's go back to bioradar for a second. The sources suggest that it might not just be something animals have. They hint that humans might have this ability too, maybe even in a more developed form.
That's a really interesting thought. If humans do have bioradar, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding how we connect to everything around us.
Imagine being able to sense those subtle energy fields, to pick up on changes in the environment that we normally wouldn't be able to. It would be like having a sixth sense.
That's an exciting idea, and the sources suggest that some ancient cultures might have been more tuned in to their bioradar abilities than we are today. They mention things like dowsing, energy healing, and shamanism as examples of how people have traditionally tapped into these subtle energies.
I wonder if our modern lifestyles have kind of dulled our bioradar senses.
It's possible. We're bombarded with so much stimulation and information all the time that might be drowning out those subtle signals that our bioradar system might be picking up.
But if we could reawaken those senses, what would we be able to achieve?
The possibilities are amazing. We might be able to develop new ways to communicate, improve our intuition, and get a deeper understanding of how everything is connected.
It's a vision of a future where we're more in tune with ourselves and the world around us. A future where we've unlocked the full potential of our bioradar abilities. But let's look at some of the research that's actually been done on human bioradar, shall we?
One of the most interesting areas of research is the study of human biomagnetism.
Human biomagnetism. What's that all about?
It refers to the weak magnetic fields that are produced by the electrical activity in our bodies. These fields are incredibly faint, but we can measure them using these super sensitive instruments called magnetometers.
So we're not just emitting light and heat, we're generating magnetic fields too. That's amazing. What have researchers learned about these biomagnetic fields?
Research has shown that different organs and tissues in our bodies generate different magnetic patterns. For example, the heart produces a strong magnetic field that you can actually detect from several feet away.
Wow, so our hearts aren't just pumping blood, they're like miniature magnets. That's a really cool thought.
It is, and the sources suggest that these biomagnetic fields might be involved in all sorts of biological processes, like how cells communicate, how our nerves function, and even how embryos develop.
So there's this whole invisible world of magnetic activity happening inside our bodies all the time. But how does this connect to bioradar?
Some researchers think that the human biomagnetic field might actually be involved in receiving and processing bioradar signals. They believe that some people might be more sensitive to these magnetic fluctuations and might unconsciously pick up on changes in the biomagnetic fields of others or even the environment itself.
So it's like we have a magnetic sense that we don't even know about. And it's crazy.
It is, and this magnetic sense might be what's behind things like intuition, empathy, and even those psychic abilities we talked about earlier.
It's a mind-blowing concept. It makes you wonder what other senses we might have that are just waiting to be discovered.
It's a really exciting thought, and the research in this area is still pretty new, so there's a lot more to learn.
The sources mention a specific type of biomagnetism research that's focused on the brain. What did they say about that?
They talk about magnetoencephalography, or MEG. It uses these extremely sensitive magnetometers to measure the magnetic fields produced by brain activity.
So it's like a high-tech version of an EEG, but it focuses on magnetic fields instead of electrical signals. What have MEG studies shown us about the brain?
MEG studies have given us these incredibly detailed images of brain activity. They've revealed the complex patterns of neurons firing that create our thoughts, emotions, and actions.
It's like looking into the electrical storm of consciousness. But how does MEG relate to bioradar?
Some researchers think that MEG might be able to detect those subtle magnetic changes that are associated with bioradar activity in the brain. They believe that certain parts of the brain might be involved in processing those bioradar signals, and that those areas might show up differently in MEG scans when someone is using bioradar.
So by looking at the magnetic activity in the brain, we might be able to pinpoint the exact neural circuits that are involved in bioradar. That's really exciting.
It is, and it can help us understand how this mysterious ability actually works.
That's amazing. The sources also mention some other techniques that have been used to study human bioradar, including biophoton emission and electrodermal activity. Can you tell me more about those?
Sure. Biophoton emission refers to the very faint light that living organisms give off. It might surprise you to learn that all living things actually emit light.
Wait, living things emit light? I thought only, fireflies did that.
You're right. The light given off by most organisms is super faint, way too weak to see with the naked eye. But there are special instruments that can detect this ultra-weak light. Some researchers believe this light might carry information about an organism's health and energy state. They're even looking into whether biophoton emission could be connected to bioradar activity.
So our bodies might not just be giving off heat and magnetic fields, but also light. It's like we're all walking constellations or something. What about that electrodermal activity you mentioned?
Oh, right. Electrodermal activity, or EDA, measures changes in the electrical conductivity of the skin. It's often used to figure out things like emotional arousal or stress levels. And now, researchers are looking into whether changes in EDA might be connected to bioradar activity.
That kind of makes sense to me. If bioradar is all about sensing these subtle energy fields, maybe our skin reacts to those fields in some way that we can measure. Are there any specific examples of how these techniques have been used to study bioradar in people?
There was one study that really caught my attention. They used EDA to see how people reacted when they were trying to, sense if someone else was in a room nearby. The researchers found that for some people, their EDA readings went up when the other person was present, even though they couldn't see or hear them.
Wow, that's a pretty interesting result. It suggests that we might be picking up on these subtle cues from the environment that we're not even aware of. What other research has been done in this area?
There have been studies using biophoton emission to look at the effects of energy healing. Some researchers have seen changes in biophoton emissions from both the healer and the person receiving the healing during healing sessions.
So maybe energy healing is working on a level that we can't see with our eyes, but can be picked up by these sensitive instruments. It's like this whole new world of subtle energy is opening up right in front of us.
It's definitely a possibility, and it just highlights how much more we have to learn about these complex relationships between energy, consciousness, and healing.
It seems like we're just getting started when it comes to understanding bioradar in humans. But let's switch gears for a second and talk about how we could use bioradar. If we could actually harness this ability, what could we do with it?
The potential applications are huge and really exciting. In medicine, for example, bioradar could completely change how we diagnose diseases. Imagine being able to spot a disease in its earliest stages just by sensing subtle changes in someone's energy field.
That would be amazing. It would be like having an early warning system for our health, catching things before they get serious.
Exactly. And bioradar could even lead to new types of therapy. What if we could use these focused energy fields to help people heal and improve their well-being? It's a whole new way of thinking about medicine.
It's like we'd be moving beyond just treating the symptoms and addressing the root cause, the energy systems that keep us healthy. That's a really cool concept. What other possibilities can you think of?
Well, when it comes to communication, bioradar could open up completely new ways for us to connect. Imagine being able to communicate directly, mind to mind, without needing words or any external devices.
Whoa, are you talking about telepathy? Like communicating directly from one mind to another? That would change everything about how we interact.
It's definitely a possibility. And it wouldn't be limited to just humans either. Imagine being able to communicate with animals, to understand their needs and what they're thinking. It would completely revolutionize how we relate to the natural world.
We could finally have those heart-to-heart conversations with our pets we've always dreamed of. But thinking bigger, bioradar could have a major impact on how we understand consciousness itself.
Absolutely. If bioradar involves receiving and processing information that goes beyond our usual senses, it could mean that consciousness isn't limited to the physical brain.
So we're talking about the idea of non-local consciousness, like a mind that goes beyond the limits of the body. That's a pretty wild idea.
It's a possibility that many researchers are exploring, and bioradar research could give us valuable clues about the nature of consciousness and how it relates to the universe.
It really makes you question everything we think we know about reality. But let's get back to some real-world examples. The sources mention a few cases of how bioradar is being used today.
One cool example is using dowsing rods to find underground water sources.
We've talked about dowsing quite a bit already, but it's amazing to think that this ancient practice is still being used today, and it actually works. The sources mention a case where a dowser was able to find a well in a place that was experiencing a drought, providing much-needed water to the community.
It really shows the power of traditional knowledge and how we can use it to solve problems we face today. And dowsing isn't just used for finding water. There's one case where a dowser actually found a lost child in a really thick forest.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like a real-life search and rescue mission using bioradar.
Exactly. It shows how bioradar could be a really valuable tool for humanitarian work.
It's inspiring to think that this ability could be used to help people who are in need. What other examples did the sources talk about?
They discuss how bioradar is being used in agriculture. Some farmers are actually using dowsing rods to find underground water veins and figure out the best places to plant their crops.
They're using bioradar to make their farming better, combining ancient wisdom with modern techniques.
Exactly. And there are even reports of farmers using bioradar to check the health of their crops and identify areas that need a little extra attention.
It's like you're developing a deeper, more intuitive connection to their land and the plants they're growing. I love that. What other applications did you find?
They talk about using bioradar in archaeology.
Archaeology. Now that's an interesting one. How are they using bioradar in that field?
Some archaeologists are actually using dowsing rods and other bioradar techniques to find buried artifacts and ancient structures. They think these objects might give off these subtle energy fields that people with sensitive abilities can detect.
So they're using bioradar to uncover secrets from the past. That's amazing.
Exactly. And there have been some pretty impressive successes, too. One case mentioned in the sources talks about an archaeologist who used dowsing rods to find a hidden chamber in an ancient Egyptian pyramid.
It sounds like something out of an Indiana Jones movie. But it really shows how much potential bioradar has to teach us about history.
For sure. And it's not just archaeology either. There's even a case where a bioradar expert found a lost shipwreck using a combination of their intuition and dowsing.
Wow, so bioradar could help us explore the oceans and find lost treasures. It's an incredibly versatile ability. But let's talk about the human experience again for a minute. The sources mention some pretty cool connections between bioradar and altered states of consciousness.
One of the most interesting links is the one between bioradar and meditation.
People have been meditating for centuries, but it's only recently that science has really started to look at how it affects our brain and body. How does bioradar fit into that?
Some researchers think that meditating might actually make our bioradar abilities stronger by calming the mind and making us more sensitive to those subtle energies.
So by quieting down all the mental chatter, we might be able to pick up on those faint signals that our bioradar system is receiving. It's like getting rid of the static on a radio to get a clearer signal.
Exactly, and some studies support this idea. They show that experienced meditators often have more activity in parts of the brain that deal with sensory processing and attention.
So their brains are becoming more tuned in to those subtle things. That's fascinating. What other altered states of consciousness are connected to bioradar?
The sources mention trance states, which are often triggered through practices like drumming, chanting, or other rhythmic activities.
I've heard of shamanic drumming and how it can induce altered states. How might these trance states affect bioradar?
Some anthropologists think that trance states give people access to a deeper level of awareness, where they can tap into information that's normally hidden from our everyday consciousness.
It's like they're shifting their perception to a different frequency and opening up all these new channels of information. That's pretty incredible. The sources also mention a connection between bioradar and those psychic abilities we talked about earlier.
Right. Some parapsychologists think that psychic abilities, things like telepathy and clairvoyance, might actually be forms of bioradar. They say that people with these abilities might be extremely sensitive to those subtle energy fields, or they might be able to unconsciously process information that goes beyond our normal senses.
That's a really intriguing idea. Maybe what we call psychic abilities are actually natural human potentials that we're just starting to understand.
I agree. It shows that we need to do more research to explore the full spectrum of what humans are capable of.
Even without getting into all the psychic stuff, the potential uses for bioradar are pretty amazing. The sources even mention some really advanced technologies that are being developed based on bioradar principles.
One of the most exciting things is the creation of biosensors that can detect and interpret those subtle energy fields. These sensors could be used for all kinds of things, from diagnosing diseases to monitoring the environment.
Imagine wearing a biosensor that could detect the early warning signs of a disease or let you know about environmental hazards. It would be like having a personal guardian angel looking out for your health.
Absolutely. And biosensors could even be used to monitor the health of ecosystems, giving us important data about the state of our planet.
It's a vision of a future where technology and nature are working together, helping us understand and protect this delicate balance of life. What other interesting technologies did you find in the sources?
They talk about biocommunication devices that could allow us to talk directly to other living things.
Hold on, are we talking about actually having conversations with plants and animals?
Yeah.
That sounds like science fiction.
I know it sounds far out, but researchers are already making progress. They're experimenting with using light, sound, and magnetic fields to send and receive information between different species.
So maybe one day we really will be able to have those conversations with dolphins and trees. But even beyond talking to plants and animals, biocommunication devices could revolutionize how humans interact with each other.
You got it. Imagine being able to communicate directly from mind to mind without needing any language or gadgets. It would be a completely new level of connection.
It's a future where communication is easy, intuitive, and really deep and meaningful. But we have to be realistic here, right? The development of these bioradar technologies is still in its early stages. There are a lot of challenges to overcome, not to mention all the ethical questions that come with this kind of technology.
That's true. It's a delicate balancing act, but the potential benefits are so huge that it's worth exploring these possibilities carefully and enthusiastically.
I agree. It's exciting to think about what the future holds for bioradar.
It is. This whole deep dive has been a fascinating exploration of a really remarkable phenomenon.
We've seen that bioradar is more than just something animals do. It seems like it might be a fundamental part of life itself.
And it has the potential to open up new levels of understanding, connection, and well-being.
It reminds us that we're all part of this huge, interconnected web of life. And there's so much more to learn about the mysteries of the universe and how we fit into it all.
Absolutely. Who knows what other amazing discoveries are waiting for us as we continue to explore the world of bioradar.
This has been an amazing journey, but we've covered so much. What do you say we take a quick break and then come back to wrap things up? Okay, we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into bioradar. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from animals navigating to human energy fields, and even those futuristic technologies.
You know, if I'm being totally honest, I started this deep dive with a bit of skepticism, but after going through all these sources, my mind is officially blown.
I get it. Bioradar can sound like something out of science fiction at first, but the deeper you go into the research, the more it feels like we're uncovering this hidden layer of reality, you know?
Exactly. It's like we're seeing the world through a new set of eyes, revealing connections and possibilities that we never even considered before.
One of the biggest shifts for me was realizing that bioradar might not be this isolated thing, but rather it could be the key to understanding how everything is interconnected.
It's starting to feel less like, out there and more like, well, science in its early stages. Like, we're putting together a puzzle,
Yeah.
and bioradar is that missing piece that helps it all make sense.
Exactly. Think about it. If all living things are constantly sending and receiving these subtle energies, it changes how we think about communication, how we perceive things, even the boundaries between individuals. It really challenges our basic assumptions about how the world works.
It definitely makes me rethink that time. I was sure my plant was judging my terrible singing. Maybe it really was picking up on my vibes.
Maybe it was. But seriously, one of the most interesting things I found in these sources is the possible link between bioradar and this idea of collective consciousness.
Okay, let's talk about that. We're talking about the idea that there's this shared field of consciousness that connects us all, right?
That's the gist of it. And the sources bring up some good points, like how flocks of birds or schools of fish seem to move as one with this shared intelligence, as if they're all linked to the same awareness.
Right. It's like they're all part of one big organism reacting instantly to each other's movements. It's amazing to watch. How could bioradar explain that?
Well, if we think of bioradar as a way of communicating through these subtle energies, then it's possible that those animals are constantly sending and receiving information within their group, creating a sort of hive mind.
So instead of just reacting to what they see, they're also sensing each other's intentions and movements on an energetic level. That's incredible. Like they're all plugged into the same network.
And it might not just be animal groups. The sources suggest that bioradar could even play a role in how we interact as humans, subtly affecting our moods, our behaviors, even our decisions.
That makes me think of those times you walk into a room and you just feel the energy, whether it's good or bad. Maybe it's not just a feeling. Maybe it's our bioradar picking up on those subtle cues from the people around us.
That's an interesting idea. It makes you wonder how much we influence each other unconsciously through those energy exchanges.
It's like we're all part of this giant, invisible bioradar network, always sending and receiving signals, whether we realize it or not.
And if we could become more aware of these interactions, imagine what we could do. We could be more empathetic, communicate better, and even work together more effectively as a society.
It's a beautiful vision of a more connected and harmonious world where we're really in tune with each other. But let's be real for a second. This is still pretty speculative, isn't it?
Of course. It's a new area of study. We need solid research, open minds, and healthy skepticism. There's still a lot we need to figure out about bioradar and what it all means.
Which means there's so much more for you to discover, dear listener. This deep dive is just a starting point. The sources you shared are a great way to jump into a world of possibilities.
If bioradar really does hold the key to understanding ourselves and the universe better, then this is just the beginning of an amazing journey.
And if our intuition is anything to go by, the future of bioradar is looking pretty bright. Until next time, stay curious and keep those bioradar antennas tuned in.